Hi. Today I want to talk about quotes, what they do and what they don't. And quotes are basically everywhere. And the context I have in mind here is mostly online debate because it's so easy on social media or in forums or whatever to insert a quote, copy paste it. We have all these um, pictures of quotes. We even have lots of sites that let you make something into a quote picture. And even that, the act of doing that has become somewhat of a meme, and that's where my interest kind of comes from, and that's where I got the idea to make this video because I think that quotes are a lot of the time used in a very odd way, and that's what I want to explore today. So, are quotes bad? Not at all. Quotes are everywhere with good reason. Chances are someone has said the thing we want to say before, and maybe they've said it even in a snappier or clearer way, or way that is just preferable in some other way. And quotes are also, I mean, there's an honesty point to quoting. It seems pathetic to claim another's thought as one's own, uh, you know, um, stealing the thunder of someone else. But there's another side to quoting, and that's less savory, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the argument from authority. And that's the idea that just because someone smart or famous said a thing doesn't mean it should have weight beyond how smart the thing they said is. So let's assume Albert Einstein said that pineapple pizza is great. And you quote that at me, and I respond, I don't think pineapple pizza is great though. And you answer, oh, you're smarter than Einstein? And that's kind of the argument from authority. Just because someone is super smart doesn't mean that their argument or whatever they said is true or even necessarily more weighty than what anyone can say. But in this video, I'm not after fallacies as such. I think that, to be honest, fallacies have sort of been done to death. And I want to take a bit of a subtler angle at times, though I guess at times I'll be analyzing the fallacies connected to quotes also. What's behind the quote? What's behind the quote? What's the the depth grammar of a quote, the thought structure, which often remains unsaid, unspoken, that accompanies something. We already did that last time, and it's going to be a frequent visitor in these videos. Uh, the idea of depth grammar and analyzing it. So, a lot of the time, someone just puts out a comment with just a quote, nothing else. So, we have to reconstruct what they think the quote does, what their intentions are. And a simple case of that analysis would be X said A, and I like A, so I now also say A. And that means, by quoting someone, I'm saying what they said. I'm taking that, making clear that I didn't come up with it myself, and saying it again. And that's all it does. And the important takeaway for that is by doing that, we make the quote our own. We join the originator in saying it. No more, no less. But we do nothing more. We are just saying it and marking it as something that we didn't come up with it ourselves. We still have to carry on the debate. Another reconstruction that's sometimes valid is X said A about issue B, and I think X is usually right, so there's no point in talking about B any further. And this, of course, gets close to an argument from authority, which is fallacious. But someone who knows a lot about something is probably worth listening to. But their opinion doesn't usually end the argument for good. The quote, the memorable quote for that is that expert opinion is the weakest kind of scientific evidence. However, there are sort of special cases in which an expert opinion does end a debate. If someone who's, I don't know, a lung doctor tells me that the lung isn't influenced by the way my right ear looks, then I have to take that. Then I have only the choice to really get into the debate and really do science to counter that point, or I have to take it. And usually I don't have the time to do research. So there are cases where it's not scientifically the case that an expert opinion ends a debate, but science is not only a debate. Um, Sometimes it's the sensible move to accept what a specialist said and be done with it. And quoting that specialist can also serve that function. Don't expect to have much success with that with very argumentative people, though. Okay, so what can quotes do? Quotes can be really useful when they're illustrative. Say we're talking about the Battle of England in 1940, the big air battle between the Germans and the British and their allies, and someone quotes Churchill's famous "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few" line about the Royal Air Force. This illustrates Churchill's view in a short and accessible way. It's very snappy, it's very clear. And it's a conversation starter. The one bringing up the quote might not even agree with Churchill, might have a completely different view, but it can serve as a point of departure for a discussion of these air battles of 1940. Another way that quotes can be useful is when they sum up complex thoughts in a memorable form. They put things sort of in a nutshell. The German historian Golo Mann said of the pompous, imposing, and historicizing architecture of the Second German Reich, "Never has building been so disingenuous." To me, that quote is useful because it sums up not just his attitude to that architecture, but mine. I agree with that. It's not a full essay. It doesn't say all there is about the architecture of that time, because no single sentence can ever do that, but it's a good topical sentence. It could stand above a more thorough discussion of the topic. And it's also thought-provoking, because typically we don't think of the activity of building being the kind of thing that is honest or dishonest. Third way that quotes can be useful is when they give better context to a position. Say there's this politician who is in favor of a tax raise. Not that that is something many politicians will admit to. A year earlier, they said they don't think taxes should be raised at all. In an honest mode, it could prompt us to ask, by using that older quote, okay, you were against it, now you're for it. What made you change your mind? In a less honest mode, we could assume bad faith and accuse them of having lied back then, having wanted to raise taxes all along. And the latter case, the less honest way of using that quote, illustrates how a quote as such doesn't do very much. If I just quote their older statement back at them, they will not necessarily know what to do about it. They'll have to guess. So we have to work with it, with the quote. It's just a piece of material. It's one among many for any argument that we might want to make. Quotes, without being an appeal to authority, an argument from authority fallacy, can be cliché. They can be empty, argumentative tropes, which serve more as sticks to whack others with than attempts to say anything meaningful. In German, we call that a Totschlagargument, literally a manslaughter argument, meaning that this is an argument that you use like a weapon instead of trying to make someone see your point. And this sort of thing isn't really analyzable usually through logic as such, like we've been doing before. It's more of a rhetorical, it's a social, interactive thing. And at the very worst, that kind of quote, the cliche quotes, are what cult researchers call thought-stopping cliches. They're not meant to make a point. They're meant to get you to shut up. And sort of an example for the first one, for the more cliche, empty kind of cliche quote, would be "Mother knows best" when we're talking about children's nutrition, say. Mother doesn't know best, unless mother happens to be an expert in children's nutrition. But it sounds so right, it's so commonly available in a philosophical and an argumentative sense, that we might be tempted to take it as an argument when it's really just a random quote, a random adage that doesn't do any work argumentatively. And something more insidious, the more Totschlagargument kind of thing, is what I discussed in my last video. It takes two to quarrel. This isn't always that. It's not always a Totschlagargument, but it is sometimes used like that about fights. It's not meant to sort of get into the reality of what happened. It's meant to get you to shut up, stop complaining, which is why I make it a point never to use that kind of language with the boys that I coach, with the 10 and 11-year-olds, which I coach in basketball. So having sort of surveyed what quotes can do and what kind of logic can lie behind them, we can say that quotes are elliptic in that they leave something out in two ways. A standard form of an argument might be this. Seeing a scratch post in an apartment is sufficient to think the owner has a cat. I see a scratch post, so I'm justified in saying that the owner has a cat. And I want you to think about where in the structure can you place a quote? And the answer is all of them. And that's even beyond the more rhetorical uses of quotes that I already mentioned. And that you can place the quote in all three of those positions is kind of the problem. And we've already mentioned that quotes with no context leave the reader or the listener to sort out what it's supposed to do on their own, and not coming out and saying what the speaker thinks they do. And the gravity that attaches to many quotes, that's where sort of the internet meme with the quote panels with pretty pictures comes in, hides the fact that there's work to be done. The gravity of a quote obfuscates, makes it hard to see that it doesn't do very much on its own. Of course, we can typically infer or guess what work the quote is supposed to do, but you'd be surprised how many online arguments begin with a misinterpreted quote or standard phrase. At best, using quotes in that way is ambiguous, it's hard to understand, it's not very clear, you're not being transparent with what you're saying. And at worst, it's outright manipulative. It subtly diverts responsibility for what's being said to the quoted person, to the point of using the name of the quoted person as sort of a shield against any rebuttal. If I find some revered figure's quote about something that seems to say what I want to say, I can put that in front of me, and now they're criticizing this revered figure if they criticize my position, forgetting that revered figures are not beyond criticism. So it can be a covert attempt at a fallacious argument from authority. And of course, if you use quotes that way, it can be a cliche or even a Totschlagargument. So what's my takeaway? My takeaway is quotes cannot and should not stand on their own. If we use a quote, we need to explain why we quote and what we claim the quote does in a debate, its role in our argument. And that's why debating on Twitter or Blue Sky is so tricky and gets out of hand so much, because there's limited space. We usually don't have the space to explain, to do these extra steps besides just chucking a quote at someone. This necessity of clarifying what a quote is supposed to do isn't always very explained very lucidly, but it's one of the first things any university textbook will tell you about how to work with quotes, or in empirical fields, even tables and diagrams which can be understood as a kind of quote. To the point that a famous philosopher once told a seminar, which I happened to be attending, an essay or lecture consists of telling them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. Robert Brandom, author of Making It Explicit, distinguished professor at the University of Pittsburgh, said that. Now, you can't criticize me about any of this, because this quote is totally irrelevant to our discussion of quotes, and I hope you learned something today, and you were entertained maybe a little, and I hope to see you next time.